Now, this is the second part of the day, Sunday, the 6th of December 2020. And this is the second part of the Khoodeelaar campaign. Khoodeelaar campaign defending the community in the East End of London against all sorts of bad things done by corporations, corporates, entities, institutions, and individuals. And at the core and the center of this defense program is and has been the idea of rejecting racism in all its forms and identifying and updating on racism and its operation. As for example, we have been exclusively diagnosing the invention of the word, the term woke, W-O-K-E, as a racist invention, essentially to undermine anti-racist ideas, advocacy, representation, campaigning in Britain. And woke is a kind of deeply poisonous mindset that gave rise to centuries of denial of the racist policies and behavior by the racist imperialists and their operatives and agents and tools and stooges active across the parts of the world that were misled into allowing the imperialists a foothold, which they then abused and expanded into empires. So in Africa and in Asia, main parts of the world. Now, the Khoodeelaar campaign, although it is founded on identifying the evidence of racism and opposing racism, diagnosing against the racist kind of narrative that Fleet Street and the mainstream media in this country promotes and carries and pervades. We have found no evidence in any of the Fleet Street papers today, Sunday, the 6th of December 2020, where there is any mention of racism this week or mention of racism in this country, except in a poisonously in denial form. And the stooges that get platforms or spots or the kind of say in making any decision about the contents and the display and the language of anything to do with, quote, race, racism, ethnicity, whatever, they behave, and we shall give the example with the today's kind of offering via the Guardian Observer with a byline called Kenan or Kenan Malik. This Kenan or Kenan Malik, I have mentioned him before, and in the 1980s, he was one of the group of liars posing as left-wing anti-racists who surfaced in Brick Lane. And these criminals were there to interfere with the community's mobilization against the deportation of a woman called Afia, And this Kenan Malik, who either was born in Pakistan, whatever part of Pakistan or India, but has a kind of name that sounds like Muslim, although he never actually mentions whether he is a Muslim or from Muslim background or whatever. And in the 1980s, he surfaced in Whitechapel, Brick Lane area as part of what has become one of the most sinister, right-wing, anti-Muslim, racist, genocide-denying operations, aiding and abetting Brexit and other kind of factors and movements in this country. And this Kenan Malik, in today's Observer, refers to racism by not calling it racism, but refers to Windrush and the black youth. He doesn't talk about racism. So when I challenged him in the 1980s, when I first spoke to him about Newham, which is where he said he came from, or he lived at the time, or he grew up in Newham, or whatever, he failed to give a factual answer, truthful answer. And I knew that he was not involved with the community, not at least the Asian community, if you like, but was an active stooge of racists and trying to create a personality for himself, which is now kind of exhibited on the Guardian. He is a kind of Macaulayite, kind of stooge. And he could be now called a kind of nephew Tom. But this nephew Tom is significant in terms of his tactics, significantly different from the nephew Tom, the official nephew Tom and criminal anti-Muslim liar, Trevor Terrible Phillips. And this Kenan Malik is not going to be ousted by the Observer or the Guardian Observer because of anything he says, because he doesn't say anything. That is the whole point. He's got an Asian name, Muslim sounding name, and it serves as a cover for the anti-Muslim agenda of the Observer and the Guardian. And as I said, the Muslims, those who trade in the name of Islam, like the various mosques-based committees and cabals in this country, they have been lying big time, because they have been keeping the community, ordinary Muslims who go to the mosque and ordinary Muslims in the neighboring areas of every mosque, away from any say, having any say in what these liars perpetrate in the name of the mosque committees. And they have got any number of excuses and barriers and obstructions. So you've got the mosque committees ruled and controlled by liars, posing as mosque committees and abusing the good faith of the ordinary Muslims in the neighborhood, in the area. And these are the committees and liars who have maintained their total silence about Muslim criminals. and I here refer to mainly the Muslim criminals whose crimes have been reported publicly by Fleet Street and other parts of the media. So whether it's the Muslim named mosque committees or the Muslim named stooges of anti-Muslim elements who are on the record as having denied the genocide of Muslims in Bosnia by the racists that attacked them in the early 90s. And this is the kind of emphasizing that although we are talking about the absence of substance in the Fleet Street papers, we are actually spending more time by looking at the absence of substance among the so-called community groups. These are all funded by and approved by the state. We shall be talking more about this in the next edition. This one is going to be slightly shorter. Now, this piece on the page 13 of the Sun on Sunday has got a heading, Council's Hatton in Witness Cop Quiz. So probably they're talking about Council's hat on. That is a kind of play with the word Hatton. But this is the item that relates to the rest of the elected mayor in Liverpool, Joe Anderson. But the bit that we have spotted here and have not been kind of able to see either on the Observer, the Guardian, or in the Times piece that they did, is that the police have been investigating, amongst other things, awarding of building contracts. That is a reference to the council, Liverpool Council. Since last year, officers working on Operation Aloft have been looking at deals between the city's town hall, that is the Liverpool City Council, and property developers. Now, this is the corruption. Housing builders are crooks most of the times. And the reason why Sadiq Khan has given go ahead to the goods yard kind of degeneration, Bishopsgate goods yard, is because Sadiq Khan has long been involved, long before he became candidate for mayor in the name of London, with property fiddlers and crooks. And we have posted many critical comments about Sadiq Khan's links with the crooks and the crooked housing contract industry. Nobody else has done that. What is happening is in the So what they have said about Derek Hutton and Joe Anderson being arrested in connection with witness intimidation and the investigation into house building contracts with property developers, that actually gives a clue as to why Fleet Street is completely dishonest, including the scum that is Sun, when it comes to town hall and council corruption. They haven't given any details. And the details they have given, the bits they have given, suggest that they know more than they are saying. And it's not sub judice to describe what has been actually published by the police or what is put in the public domain by the police. Because it's not commenting. To report evidence that is available online and publicly is not true. It doesn't constitute comment. It's there already in the public domain. So it's not kind of prejudicing a fair trial. And the whole of the Sun on Sunday is full of rubbish and lies and contradictions. And there is a kind of competition among these liars as to which one can lie the worst or is the worst liar than the next one. They're saying now that the Sun on Sunday or the scum on Sunday is saying that the EU side of the kind of negotiation never wanted a deal on Brexit with Britain. Now that is suggesting that Britain wanted a deal, that is the Brexiteers always wanted a deal. Yet all the records, all the headlines and everything over the last 4 years has been the threat issued by the Brexiteers that they won't have a deal, that there is no deal. In fact, it was such a prominent kind of claim that they didn't want a deal that Corbyn was mechanically kind of asking no deal on the table or a deal on the table or something to do with the deal. That they should not have any no deal on the table, that there should be a kind of deal. So whatever the Fleet Street is saying about any of this is all lies. And when we say lies, we mean lies, literally, as defined in the dictionary. On the one side is the lies, and the other side is the cover-up. And this is where the stooge boy, Kenan Malik, has got a platform on the Guardian Observer. The Guardian Observer is absolutely, its style is poisonous. Its style is poisonous and kind of deceptive and misleading and completely false. There is a woman called Barbara Ellen. These are some of Fleet Street's most poisonous kind of names. There is a piece about Isaac Newton's attempt to unlock secret code of pyramids. Apparently, this was an explanation. The pyramids' secret codes contained explanations on the apocalypse. We shall discuss that in another edition or on another date. And also, we shall look at the John Donne poems, 400-year-old poems that have been found. Well, before we land ourselves on the right page, containing the Kenan Malik kind of pretension, here is a pretentious piece by a man called Gary Colton about two church persons. And the headline is Exploitation of Poor Verges on Evil, say clerics driven to tears by the debt crisis. Now, these clergy persons, of course, would never stop crying if they were genuinely moved to tears by the experience they have had elsewhere about the way the poor are treated in this country. Now, if they came to Tower Hamlets or Newham and looked at the behavior of the two councils, for example, they would never stop crying. Yet, even the Guardian doesn't report these things. And of course, the rest of the Fleet Street doesn't. It never does. Now, here is Kenan Malik saying, our leaders cannot preach respect and treat the vulnerable with contempt. Now, this is not news. This is actually what goes on and has been going on for centuries in this country. And he is part of the same culture of contempt and disrespect shown by the racists and the so-called left. So here is the piece that he has written about the black youths. And we shall be looking at this. I'll check again the online and see if I have missed his use of racism at all. But here he says, Like recent Windrush scandal, it was also the product of a deliberately engineered hostile environment. This one directed not against black Britons, deemed not British enough, but against working class people judged not to be sufficiently morally fit. Now, this is a completely false line that the racists have adopted in the recent years. And Kenan Malik is a liar not to admit that he is stealing from his role model racists, because they have created a kind of false excuse and pretext to undermine opposition to racism by creating the image of the white working class that are being denied their human rights and are being not treated with respect and are being treated with contempt by the ruling kind of criminals. There is no basis for using opposition to racism as if it is done more genuinely, and opposition to prejudice against so-called white working class is not being genuinely kind of done. This is the right-wing, very racist line. So Kenan Malik is doing the same thing as the rest of the Revolutionary Communist Party racist criminal operatives there. They have been operating as a rank and a cadre for the right-wing part of the state and right-wing movement. How is this logical, let alone moral, let alone practical, to say that opposition to racism aimed at black people is too genuine, and because of that, opposition to hostility to white poor and white working class is not being effective? How is that equation even kind of primarily valid? It is not, because the racism is a parasitical occupation that is used by the big business and big agenda wielders who brainwash the poor white working class and others to physically display their hostility to black people. And in doing that, they conceal the robbery and the lootery and the criminal theft that every agenda, every kind of curriculum, every syllabus, every program they devise at schools, at institutions, in organizations is intended to perpetuate. And it is also wrong to say divide and rule. It's completely wrong to say that divide and rule is a thing. It's not divide and rule at all. It is lie to people and deprive them of their say and their assertions and their entitlements. Divide and rule is a completely different proposition, because it supposes that those who divide are themselves not racist and not anti the poor, or they are not And also, they're not creating the poverty and the racism and the obstructions. And none of this is to be found discussed in the Fleet Street papers or the mainstream or anywhere except here, this channel and this program. I'm going to look at Kenan Malik online and see if he has got the reference to the racism anywhere that I have missed, that I may have missed, let's say. Why is this criminal choosing to deflect from the commentary about racist policies? So this criminal doesn't have even the word racism in that piece. So the criminal Kenan Malik is as much a liar about racism as has been the entire core gang of the racists, anti-Muslim deniers of the genocide of the Bosnians in the 1990s. And these racists allowed the Home Office to deport Afia. They interfered and they messed up. So they operated apparently actively agitating against the deportation of Afia, but in fact they facilitated the Home Office deporting Afia. And the empirical evidence includes the behavior of a racist called Keith Thompson, the racist criminal. This racist criminal behaved as an agent provocateur. And the chapter and verse of his so-called book about, quote, fighting racism is long overdue to be published, and it will be published. So how can Kenan Malik, the racists, the anti-Muslim stooge and colluder, this criminal has written this piece called Our Leaders Can't Preach Respect and Treat the Vulnerable with Contempt. Now, why does it have to be him? Our leaders, any church person and any kind of person in the church can say that and be ignored. The idea of fighting injustice and capitalism is not about making slogans and stating the obvious. The idea entails opposing racist behavior. He is not opposing racist behavior at all. Of course, he is not even acknowledging racism. He is, in fact, doing the opposite. He is blaming the victims of racism for somehow being responsible for the state's contempt to the white working class. That is the line. In the first week of June 1978, I made a phone call. The first Sunday of June 1978, I made a phone call to the then Observer, which wasn't Guardian yet, in the afternoon of that Sunday. And I made a phone call to the Observer office and asked to speak to the byline reporter who had written a stupid, absolutely stupid, ignorant, idiotic piece in that Sunday's Observer about Brick Lane in the east end of London, because it was the month, literally within the month after Altaf Ali had been murdered. So I had been having to confront all these racists in Fleet Street in 78. Nobody knows this. And the criminal liars in Brick Lane, subliterate and illiterate morons who have been kind of behaving as prostitutes, giving their names to others to write books by their name. These liars cannot even read the stuff that have been written with their names as the authors. They can't even read these things after the publication in the last 2 years, these criminals. They have no idea what opposing racists in Fleet Street is like and who is doing the opposing, who is doing the diagnosis. I have been doing this. And this is the example of what I'm doing now. Kenan Malik, this racist, genocide denier, he's not denying the genocide that the Nazis did of their victims, but he's denying the genocide of the Muslims of Bosnia and nearby areas in the early 1990s. And he remains on the list of the Revolutionary Communist Party, de facto. He has absolutely no reference. Kenan Malik has not referred to any work in opposing racism that he has actually done along with any person, either African or Asian, whether African or Asian born or of African and Asian kind of origin. It is like Diane Abbott. I mean, the entire crew of the Jeremy Corbyn Garden Gnome leadership is kind of recruited to make complimentary references to Diane Abbott as a fighter against racism. But in all her career, she has been endorsed by white men. Michael Portillo, a racist on the BBC. Andrew Neil, the racist on the BBC. Ken Livingstone, lying still Livingstone, who gave her the job at the expense of the service by the GLC to the cause of the media access to the GLC. She was completely useless, and she was a dishonest employee in the so-called press office in the GLC. Every time I wanted something and I was kind of faced with the prospect of having to ask her to give me a copy of the stupid lying GLC's press release, she failed. And she failed to give me answers to the hundreds of questions I had against the GLC. Not that I put those questions to her, but whenever it became physically unavoidable and I had to kind of interact with her at the so-called press office, she was useless. She lied. And she was useless. So her and the others, like London's Sadiq Khan, I mean, he has been one of the recipients of these racist left promotions. And the racist left promote these stooges. I mean, Sadiq Khan, Rukhsana Fiaz, and Sajid Javid, they put them all together and they peddle a package saying that all three of them are children of Pakistani bus drivers. Now, that of course warrants a long discussion about the bus drivers and Pakistanis and whatever. But our reference to them is not about the bus driver or Pakistanis. It is to them as Asians or African people in kind of positions, political positions in this country. Now, there is this pattern. There is this absolutely unmistakable racist pattern. And the pattern is that they are employed or given those positions or given the kind of nominations in the cases of Sadiq Khan and Roxana Fiaz by their racist backers and endorsers, in effect, who actually control the show, on the assumption that these two, Sadiq Khan and Roxana Fiaz, would behave as ignorant, clueless, idiotic, racist whites do behave. So there is no substance in anything Roxana Fiaz says about racism, and there is no substance in anything Sadiq Khan says about racism. These are shallower than the shallow. And in comparison with either of them, Kenan Malik, who may well be a similar background, not necessarily bus driver father, but the point is that he may be kind of related to one of the parts, either Pakistan itself or the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Or he may be from India, and he may be like a descendant of a Muslim that probably was a Muslim but no longer remarkably Muslim, whatever. But the name is definitely reminiscent of a Muslim kind of nomenclature. But the role that this Malik and that Sadiq Khan and the Roxana Fiaz, each one is playing and has been playing, is identical, or Diane Abbott, identical. They really don't have any record, really, of working in the communities along with other either Asian people or African people. We'll come to that in the case of Roxana Fiaz, who has African collaborators or colluders, but they are not engaged in opposing racism. It's in perpetuating corruption in Neom Council that Fiaz has got kind of alliance with African Asian background people. And in the case of Kenan Malik, there is no connection whatsoever with any Asian or African person, as far as I can check, going back to the 1980s, when he was part of the racist gang posing as Revolutionary Communist Party, fronted by the racist criminal liar called Keith Thompson. So these are only shades less complicit and less criminal and less brazen than Trevor Terrible Peelips, who has been the full-time mental slave for at least four decades to the varieties of regimes in this country who are racist and anti-Muslim. Now, we are all of this discussion is going back to what happened in Liverpool. Derek Hatton got arrested along with Joe Anderson. And we are now in Tower Hamlets, we are in the middle, at least of a kind of conversation. It's not as rigorous as it should be, as fact-based as it should be, as democratic as it should be, as widely campaigning for rights as it should be. But there is a reference that the elected mayor post should be scrapped. Whether it will be scrapped is not at all certain. And that is where I'm coming again to the similar kind of role players in posts of elected councillors in Tower Hamlets. There is not a single councillor. There is not one single elected councillor in Tower Hamlets who is campaigning on anything. Think about that. Now, if Kenan Malik's headline about vulnerable is a completely criminally corrupt, poisonously fabricated word in the context of the abuse made of that word by the likes of this dishonest Kenan Malik or by Roxana Fiaz or by Sadiq Khan or anybody else. Vulnerable is a very misleading word. And most importantly, it is one of those words that can be used to deflect from the actual issue, attention away from the actual issue, attention away from the failures and negligence and the criminal routine indulged in by the elected councillors or the elected mayor or the elected mayor's cabinet so-called personnel. Because vulnerable doesn't refer to any particular vulnerability. It's a kind of stock word. Anything can be cited as an example. And most of the people who can kind of technically be covered in the wide group of vulnerables, they don't have things common, feelings or experiences between them or among them. When it comes to experiencing the state of negligence and criminality of an elected mayor regime in any council, for example, in Newham or in Tower Hamlets, or indeed in Liverpool. Now, in the last 4 years, I have been investigating Liverpool, amongst other places, and I have been focusing on Joe Anderson. Now, as I have noticed, there is of course, note from the Merseyside police that people shouldn't be commenting in case a comment may jeopardize the fair trial of the accused or the arrested. So I'm not going to share at this stage the facts of what I have learned about Liverpool. But I can say without any comment that there have been, from the word go in 2012, when Joe Anderson first became elected as mayor at the expense of Liverpool. There have been campaigns and calls for his resignation. And this increased. The calls became louder and louder after 2015, 16, 17. And because of other factors intervening in terms of UK-wide politics, the focus on Joe Anderson kind of receded. But they never went away. The focus, that is the substance of the allegations against Anderson, never were withdrawn, and they never kind of receded, and they never disappeared. And yeah, the question about the connection between Derek Hatton and Joe Anderson deserves to be evaluated in a wider context of the criminality that is built in the post of elected mayor. Nothing to do with the arrest. I make it very clear, I'm not commenting on the arrest of Joe Anderson at all. I'm commenting on the fact that Derek Hatton, who has not been a member of the Labour Party for 30 plus years, since he was deprived of his membership by Neil Kinnock and his leadership. Now, what could be the political reason for Anderson and Hatton to remain close? What could be the social reasons? Because according to his kind of claims, Derek Hatton has ceased to be a political person and has a business, a property business, which he says he runs in Cyprus. So what could be the reason for Derek Hatton attending Labour Party events, which is where he was photographed with Joe Anderson, and as the photograph has been recycled and republished by the Times newspapers, what was the politics there? Something fishy going on there. And it means that the gang that was involved with the militant tendency, so-called, has not disappeared, has not disintegrated, and that it is still behaving in an entryist way. For example, when Corbyn was up for kind of election by the Labour Party members, Hatton made a point of coming into the discussion, and he made outrageously outlandish claims in praising Jeremy Corbyn. If Hatton was telling the truth that he's left politics behind, what on earth was he doing? Giving certificates and regular commentaries not asked for from Merseyside, recommending all kinds of things in favor of Corbyn, and even predicting that he might be getting back as a member of the Labour Party. Now, none of that has been the subject of any police inquiry. What has been is the property relationship. And we shall drop it there, not go into the details of that particular allegation. We shall wait for the prosecution and the full public kind of publication of the allegations in due course. Because we are in the context of the campaign against the elected mayor post. And in Tower Hamlets, there have been more than allegation about property dealings and the Tower Hamlets Council. And this is where the question comes in again. Why hasn't any person from Tower Hamlets Council from the period October 2010 up till, let's say now, 2000, it is now 10 years and 2 months since the post of elected mayor was created or occupied or began to be occupied. And there is all manner of credible evidence. The Tower Hamlets Council has been a vehicle for property-related criminality throughout the whole period. And as we have said, at least 3 elected councillors have been found guilty of housing or housing benefit fraud and have been sent to jail, whatever the length of time they have been sent to jail for. But they have been sentenced to jail, prison terms. It's not a kind of guess that we are making. We are actually referring to actual events. One councillor, the first one to be so prosecuted and jailed, is Shalina Akhtar, a woman who is no longer a councillor. And the next one was Shahed Ali, who is no longer a councillor but was a councillor. And the latest one has been former councillor for Lansbury called Muhammad Harun. Now, these are 3 elected councillors at the time of their arrest and their kind of trial and imprisonment. 3 elected councillors, not 1, not 2, not 3 elected councillors have been found guilty of housing-related corruption and criminality. And none of the mayors in place at the time has been prosecuted. How come? Because the mayor, incumbent mayor in Tower Hamlets, at the expense of Tower Hamlets, in the name of Tower Hamlets, has been the one responsible for giving the orders to abuse the council's rules, ignore the council's rules and procedures, and overlook the due diligence duty and make decisions worth millions of pounds of property. And not a single councillor at any of these series of prosecutions, not a single councillor has spoken. Number 1, they haven't spoken. And number 2, they haven't spoken against the corruption of the Tower Hamlets Council. It's not as if these councillors haven't known of the corruption going on or the housing criminality going on. They have known. And if there is any doubt, let me emphasize that our campaign alone, hypothetically, we are saying that our campaign alone, we are saying that alone intentionally and leaving the possibility included of others doing the same. The mayor may not have done that. We haven't got access to the actual files received by Tower Hamlets Council from other people other than our campaign, other than myself by name. But the Tower Hamlets Council has been allowed to operate series of crimes and criminal activities that is outside of and different from and in addition to and on top of the 3 prosecuted and imprisoned elected councillors X, the other employees in the council or the full-time employees in the Tower Hamlets Council, including in the housing benefits section, in the housing allocation section, or so-called housing option section. All of these have been lying, and they have been liars. So the council has been known as having a kind of lack of accountability, lack of democratic accountability, lack of transparency, and lack of application to the needs of the community. Yet the local paper, the East London Idiotizer, doesn't publish any of that. And there is nothing else that publishes any of that. What there is a pretense operated by a racist criminal called Mark Baines. That racist criminal has been pretending to be running a thing called the Wapping Lab in Wapping or something. And it has been changed now recently. And that liar, because he's racist, has missed out on most of the original stories and campaign information that we alone know about, because we are the ones who do the campaigns. And we are the ones who have been doing the longest campaign since long before this racist criminal Mark Baines surfaced in Tower Hamlets, probably from the London Borough of Lambeth or from an address in the London Borough of Lambeth. So what the liars in post successively as elected mayor have been doing is taking for granted the silence of the elected councillors. And they have been technically correct to take for granted the silence of the elected councillors in place throughout their period concerned. And what they have done, in the case of Lutfur Rahman, who was the one that was the first incumbent in October 2010, and he was incumbent for 6 calendar years, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And because there is no forum, democratic forum in the council, Lutfur Rahman did whatever suited whatever he wanted to do. If Lutfur Rahman wanted to make money privately without disclosing what money he was spending or transferring to whatever, there was no discussion about that possibility among the councillors at any time, because the way that the corruption in the elected mayor regime goes on is that the mayor is projected or kind of painted or shown as being above all accountability. And if the proceedings, the contents of the many witnesses who claim that Lutfur Rahman was kind of being the beneficiary of Muslim prayer leaders or imams and similar type of people, like the people who give the public sermon, etc., then many of those kind of preachers actually certified that if Lutfur Rahman was not getting the votes of these persons, the preached at persons, then it would be a breach of their duties in accordance with the faith. Now that was absolutely corrupt and absolutely untrue, absolutely untruthful, absolutely against the faith of Islam. So that came up in the part of the proceedings in the witness kind of testimonies during the hearing by Richard Morey of the petition by 4 persons in Tower Hamlets. Now, neither Richard Morey nor the so-called barrister, licensed law trader, Francis Hoare, Hoar, neither Richard Morey nor the kind of so-called licensed law trader for the petitioners took the references to the spiritual influence preaching by the persons who wanted to get Lutfur Rahman to get the vote of the people in the borough at the election. So why was he not asked questions when it was actually on the table? Why wasn't he asked the question? And that is the question that is tip of the iceberg, because other statements in the witness part of the witness evidence or testimony included significant incidents of menacing witness intimidation. By the side that Lutfur fronted. And many of the witnesses were visited by supporters of Lutfur who were actually in posts as elected councillors. They visited these people and threatened them with kind of reprisals. That is what one of the aspects of the evidence given before Morey. And yet Morey, in his so-called judgment published on the 23rd of April, 2015 doesn't make any express references to those details, those substance that he actually justifiably could refer to, because they were on the record, they had been delivered before him by witnesses and persons called. And there is this other kind of source, if you like. And the other source is the references not in words but in effect to the abuse of the council's resources, the money, the property, and the allocation of grants. These are not things that has happened in Liverpool, yet the police have been investigating for 18 months or 16 months. The smaller range of allegations against the Liverpool City Council and against Liverpool's city mayor and against the unidentified person or persons who were kind of planned to benefit from the outcome of the investigation, which would be financial benefit. And what has happened is that since Mori published his judgment on the 23rd of April 2015 against Luthuraman, Luthuraman went to the High Court, or attempted to initiate a full-fledged hearing on all the key aspects of Mori's decision. And all of those attempts were unsuccessful. Now, why they were unsuccessful in each case has not been publicly clearly identified. But there was, and there has been, and there is a kind of hesitation and kind of reluctance on the part of the people who knew the extent of the rampant corruption going on in Tower Hamlets in those 6 calendar years. There is a hesitation to take it forward. So although the two so-called conservative opposition councillors are there who have spoken at one point or another against the mayor election of 2018, and before the 2014, and before that 2010, 2011. The discussions about and the references to these elections always entail and bring up the very credible question and assertion that the local ombudsman has been assumed to not exist at all. What I'm saying is that is proof of the complete complicity with the corruption of elected mayor by the regulator or the regulators. And decision has been made by the police, or decision has been made somewhere in the government for the police to officially not proceed with charging any of the criminals involved in the crimes involving poverty, property in Tower Hamlets during the years, let's say 2010, October 2010 up to now, which is the 6th of December 2020. We shall be continuing in the next editions